For 8 months, Marcus had visited his daughter's grave every Saturday morning. He would arrive before dawn, when the cemetery was still wrapped in fog and silence, and sit beside the marble stone etched with her name, Emma, 1998-2023. He brought flowers that withered, wrote letters he never sent, and spoke words into the cold earth that no living person would hear. The grief had become his only constant, more reliable than sleep, more familiar than joy had ever been. Then, one Saturday, he noticed something different. A drawing lay carefully placed against the stone, protected beneath a smooth piece of glass. It was a child's rendering in colored pencil, Emma as a figure surrounded by light, her arms open, her smile unmistakable. Marcus's breath caught. His hands trembled as he picked up the glass. The drawing was fresh, the colors vivid. Someone knew his daughter's name. Someone had come here. Someone cared enough to draw her. Week after week, new drawings appeared. A girl in a garden, a woman dancing beneath stars, Emma holding flowers, Emma laughing. Each drawing was more tender than the last, each one a prayer rendered in pencil and hope. Marcus began timing his visits differently, arriving earlier, staying later, desperate to catch a glimpse of the person who had appointed herself guardian of his daughter's memory. But the artist always came when he was not there, as if they were trading places in a dance of grief only they understood. This is the story of two strangers, bound by loss, separated by sorrow, and ultimately healed by the simple act of showing up for each other's pain. What began as an anonymous gesture of compassion became a revelation about the courage it takes to love someone you've never met, and the redemption found when two broken hearts finally recognize each other. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, we share stories that prove kindness still matters. Chapter 1. The first drawing that day. No one expected a single act of kindness to change so many lives. What began as quiet sorrow became a story of healing, compassion, and love the world will never forget. The Saturday morning was cold, the kind of cold that sinks into bone and stays. Marcus arrived at Oakwood Cemetery as the sun was just beginning to dissolve the darkness, painting the horizon in shades of grey and pale amber. His truck sat idle in the empty parking lot. He had learned to come early, when the world still belonged to the grieving, before visitors arrived with their measured steps and practiced solemnity. The path to Emma's grave wound through rows of identical stones, each one marking a life that had mattered to someone. Marcus knew the route by heart now, left past the oak trees, straight across the south field. 3rd row, 7th stone, Emma Grace Mitchell, beloved daughter, forever in our hearts. He knelt beside it as he always did, his knees pressing into the damp earth. In his hands he carried a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite. They would last perhaps a week before the frost took them. That was the rhythm of his grief. Flowers wilting, prayers dissolving into silence, returning the following Saturday to begin again. But this morning, something was different. Marcus noticed the glass first, a small, smooth pane of clear acrylic, carefully angled against the base of the stone. Beneath it lay a drawing. His breath stopped. His hands moved of their own accord, reaching for it with the caution of someone handling something sacred. The drawing was rendered in colored pencils, blues, golds, and soft pinks. It showed a girl, unmistakably Emma, surrounded by light. Her hair was long, just as it had been in life. Her smile held that particular quality of joy that Marcus had spent months trying to hold on to in memory. And around her, the artist had drawn rays of light, not harsh or blazing, but gentle, as if the girl were glowing from within. At the bottom, in careful block letters, were the words, Emma's light. Marcus sat back hard, his chest heaving. Who had done this? Who knew his daughter's name well enough to draw her face? Who understood without being told? that this was exactly what he needed to see on this particular morning. Proof that his daughter had mattered, that she was not forgotten, that someone else had thought of her and cared enough to create something beautiful. He turned the drawing over in his hands. There was no signature, no note, no name, just the drawing, an offering left by a stranger. Marcus pressed it to his chest and closed his eyes. For the first time in 8 months, he did not feel entirely alone. Chapter 2. The Vigil. The following Saturday, Marcus arrived even earlier than usual. He had not slept more than 2 hours each night since discovering the first drawing. He had rehearsed 100 versions of what he might say, questions he might ask, words of gratitude that seemed impossibly inadequate. The cemetery was still dark when he parked his truck. He walked the familiar path with purpose, his heart beating faster than it should. At Emma's grave, he found everything as he had left it. Lilies wilted now, the glass and the first drawing carefully removed and placed in his nightstand at home, where he could look at it when the weight of mourning became too heavy to bear. He settled himself on the cold ground, his back against the stone. The earth beneath him was hard from the November frost. Above, the stars were beginning to fade as dawn crept across the sky. He waited. Hours passed. The sun rose. Other visitors began to arrive at the cemetery. An elderly woman placing roses on a grave 3 rows over. A young couple standing in silence before a stone dated just last year. Marcus watched them all, searching each face, wondering if any of them could be the artist. But as the morning wore on, no one approached Emma's grave. No one came with drawing in hand, no soft footsteps, no whispered prayer. By noon, Marcus was alone again, his vigil fruitless. He stood to leave, his legs stiff, his heart heavy with disappointment. And then he saw it, a small object placed at the base of the stone, in the same spot as before. Another drawing, protected beneath the same smooth glass. This one showed Emma from behind, standing in a field of wildflowers, her hand raised as if waving goodbye. But there was hope in the gesture, not finality. The flowers around her glowed with color. The sky behind her was filled with light. The title, written in careful letters, "She waits for you." Marcus held the drawing and wept, not from despair, but from the strange, fragile sensation of being known by a stranger. Someone was thinking of Emma. Someone remembered. And now Marcus understood that this was not a mystery he needed to solve. This was a gift. This was grace. Chapter 3. The Questions. 2 weeks passed, and Marcus had collected 5 drawings now, each one a small miracle of compassion. He had framed them carefully and hung them in his bedroom, where he could see them first thing in the morning and last thing before sleep. Each image was a window into Emma, not as she had been in life, but as she existed now in someone else's heart. The drawings showed her in different moments. Emma dancing with invisible partners, Emma reading beneath a tree, Emma surrounded by children's laughter, Emma standing at the edge of a vast ocean, her face turned toward the horizon. Each one held a title written in that same careful hand. She sings, she dreams, she hopes. Marcus found himself constructing theories about the artist. Was it a woman? The drawings had a tenderness that felt feminine, though he knew that was no certain evidence. Was it someone who had known Emma? A friend from school, perhaps, or someone from her yoga class? Or was it a stranger? Someone who had simply wandered through the cemetery and been moved by the stone, by the name, by the simple fact of a young life ended too soon. He began to keep a journal, writing down observations, the time each drawing appeared, the details of the artwork, the messages. He noticed that the artist always arrived on Saturday mornings, always before 9 o'clock. The drawings were always protected with care, always left with intention. One Saturday, Marcus arrived with a notepad and pen. He would write a message. He would leave it at the grave, along with flowers and gratitude. "Thank you for remembering Emma. Your kindness has given me a reason to wake up each morning. I would very much like to know who you are and how you knew my daughter." He placed the note beneath a stone, weighted down carefully. Then he waited in his truck, parked at the far end of the cemetery, where he could see without being seen. His heart pounded with anticipation and something else, a flicker of fear. What if this person did not want to be found? What if the drawings were meant to be a private communication between them and Emma? And his attempt to uncover the artist's identity would break the spell. But he waited anyway. He needed to know. He needed to thank them. Comment where you're watching from. These stories of kindness connect hearts across the world. Chapter 4. The meeting by noon, Marcus was beginning to lose hope. The morning had passed without incident, and he had seen no one approach the grave. He was about to start the truck when movement caught his eye, a figure walking slowly through the cemetery, a familiar path worn by repetition. The woman was small, perhaps in her early 60s, with grey hair pulled back in a simple bun. She wore a long coat the colour of mourning, and in her hands she carried a bundle of papers. New drawings, Marcus realised. His breath caught. After all these weeks of waiting, of hoping, the artist was finally here. He was about to step out of the truck when he noticed something that stopped him cold. The woman did not go to Emma's grave. Instead, she turned left toward the older section of the cemetery and knelt before a stone several rows away. Marcus watched as she carefully placed the drawings, not one, but several, against that grave. Her shoulders shook silently. Marcus's first instinct was to return to Emma's grave, to check if today's drawing was already there. But something held him. Curiosity, yes, but also a sudden understanding. This woman was not leaving drawings only for Emma. She was leaving them for someone else too. He got out of the truck quietly and walked toward her. She did not hear him approach. She was too absorbed in her grief, in whatever private conversation she was having with the grave before her. Marcus read the stone. David James Chen. 1995-2022. A life loved beyond measure. "Excuse me," Marcus said softly. The woman startled, turning quickly, her hands still outstretched toward the grave. Her eyes were red from crying, her face lined with the kind of sorrow that came from long practice. For a moment, she simply stared at him, as if trying to place him. "I'm sorry," Marcus continued. "I didn't mean to frighten you. I'm Marcus Mitchell. My daughter Emma, she's buried just over that way." He pointed vaguely toward where his daughter's grave lay. "I've been finding drawings at her stone. Your drawings. I wanted to thank you." The woman's face changed. Recognition flooded her features, followed by something that looked like shame. She stood slowly, her knees protesting the movement. "Oh," she said, her voice barely audible. "Oh, I didn't realize anyone would notice." Notice? Marcus felt a sudden tenderness for this stranger. "I've been cherishing them. Each one. They've helped me more than I can say, but I need to know. How did you know my daughter?" The woman's eyes filled with fresh tears. She turned back toward David's grave, as if drawing strength from it. "I didn't," she said quietly. "I never met Emma, but I've been visiting David's grave every Saturday for 2 years now, and I noticed her stone. I noticed that someone cared enough to leave flowers, and I saw how recently the grass around it was worn by knees, and I thought about how terrible it must be to lose a child, how isolated that grief must feel." She paused, her voice cracking. "I lost someone too, my son, and no one visits his grave anymore except me." Marcus felt something shift within him, a recognition, a mirror held up to his own sorrow. "So you left drawings," he said, understanding dawning. "I thought," the woman continued, "that perhaps it might help, to know that someone remembered, that someone cared enough to create something. I've been an art teacher for 30 years. It was the only way I knew how to say I'm sorry. I see you. Your child mattered." Marcus looked at this woman, this stranger who had grieved alongside him without asking for anything in return, and he understood that he was standing face to face with grace incarnate. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarah," she said. "Sarah Chen." "Marcus," he replied, "and Emma would have been honored to be remembered by you." Chapter 5. Two griefs. They began meeting every Saturday after that. Marcus would arrive at the cemetery an hour earlier than usual, and he would find Sarah already there, kneeling before David's grave with fresh drawings in hand. She had been creating them for 2 years, ever since David's death, and she had thousands of them stored in boxes at home, each one a small act of devotion, each one a prayer rendered in pencil and color. "I paint," Sarah explained one morning as they sat together on a bench between their children's graves. "Or rather, I used to. After David died, I couldn't paint anymore. The large canvases felt too empty, too demanding. But drawings felt like conversations, like I could talk to him without needing words." Marcus listened to her speak about David, a sensitive boy who had wanted to be a musician, who had died in a car accident at 27, who had left a girlfriend and a best friend, and a mother who had spent 2 years trying to transform her grief into something tangible. "The drawings for Emma," Sarah continued, "they started as something small. I would see her name, and I would think about you, this man who came every week and spoke to his daughter like she could still hear him. And I thought, well, perhaps I could create something. Perhaps I could be the bridge between the living and the dead, carrying messages of love that might not be heard otherwise." "You are," Marcus said. "You absolutely are." Over the following weeks, their Saturday rituals began to merge. Marcus would bring coffee in a thermos, and Sarah would bring fresh drawings. They would sit together at the graves, and Sarah would tell Marcus stories about David, his terrible jokes, his kind heart, his dream of playing violin in an orchestra. And Marcus would tell Sarah about Emma, her love of nature, her contagious laugh, her habit of rescuing injured birds and nursing them back to health in a corner of the backyard. The stories began to animate their grief, to transform it from a lonely weight into something that could be shared, witnessed, honored. Marcus realized slowly that he had been waiting not just to find the person who left the drawings, but to find another person who understood, not intellectually, but viscerally, the way only someone who had lost a child could understand. "Do you still feel guilty?" Sarah asked one morning. "Sometimes I wonder if David knows how much I loved him. If he knew before he died. I don't think I told him enough." Marcus nodded. "Every day," he admitted. "Every day I wish I had more time, more words, more moments." "We didn't have the option of forever," Sarah said. "We only had the time we were given, and we did the best we could. I have to believe that was enough." Chapter 6. The Catalyst. 3 months after meeting Sarah, Marcus found himself thinking about life in a way he hadn't since Emma died. Not moving on, he would never move on, but moving forward. The distinction felt important. Moving on suggested leaving Emma behind. Moving forward meant carrying her with him, letting her shape who he was becoming. One Saturday, Sarah arrived with an unusual request. "I want to show you something," she said, pulling a thick folder from her bag. Inside were hundreds of drawings, not just of David and Emma, but of other graves, other names. Graves that Sarah had noticed over the years, stones without visitors, dates that showed young lives ended too soon, names that belonged to the forgotten. "I've been leaving drawings at other graves too," Sarah explained. "Not as many as for David and Emma, but scattered throughout the cemetery. And I've been thinking, what if we did more? What if we created something bigger?" a project dedicated to honoring the ones no one remembers. Marcus felt something awaken in him, not just a reason to continue living, but a reason to create, to contribute, to be part of something meaningful. "How would we do that?" he asked. "I could teach people to draw," Sarah said, "or paint. We could organize volunteers, create a community art project. Imagine if every grave in this cemetery was honored, even just once, with a drawing, a painting, a note of remembrance. Imagine if every person who was buried here knew that someone, somewhere, thought they were worth remembering." Marcus looked at this woman who had saved him without knowing she was doing it, and he recognized in her the same yearning he felt, the need to transform personal grief into collective compassion, to make meaning from loss. "I'm in," he said. "Whatever you need from me." If this story has already touched your heart, hit the like button. It helps the message of compassion reach more people who need hope. Chapter 7. The Project. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the community center where Sarah had set up the first official meeting of the Memorial Drawing Project. The room was filled with people, some who had lost children, some who had lost parents, some who had simply heard about the project and wanted to contribute to something that honored the forgotten dead. Sarah stood at the front of the room, a paintbrush in her hand, her eyes bright with purpose. This was not the grieving woman Marcus had first met at the cemetery. This was Sarah transformed, still carrying her loss, but no longer crushed beneath its weight. "Every person here is connected by one thing," Sarah said to the assembled group. "We understand what it means to love someone who is no longer here. We understand how cruel it can be when the world moves on, when a grave becomes just another stone, when a name is forgotten. Today, we're going to change that. Today, we're going to create art, not because we're trained artists, but because our love gives us permission to try." Marcus watched as people began to work. There were drawings and paintings, written tributes and photographs. Some people worked in silence, tears streaming down their faces. Others worked with quiet conversation, sharing stories about the people they had lost. An elderly man spoke about his husband of 50 years. A young woman created a memorial to her sister. A teenager drew flowers around the name of a classmate who had died by suicide. What emerged over the course of the day was not a collection of technically perfect artworks, but something far more powerful, a testament to love, to memory, to the refusal to let grief be solitary. "These will be displayed here for 1 month," Sarah announced. "And then together, we'll take them to the cemetery. We'll honor as many forgotten graves as we can. And we'll do this again next month and the month after that, because remembering is an act of rebellion against the cruelty of forgetting." Marcus stood beside Sarah and watched the faces of the people in the room transform. He saw relief, purpose, healing. These were people who had been drowning in private grief, and now they had discovered that their pain could be shared, could be witnessed, could be transformed into something beautiful. Chapter 8. The Anniversary. 1 year after the first drawing appeared at Emma's grave, Marcus sat in his living room and looked at all 9 drawings Sarah had created that year. They hung on his wall in a perfect square, and they told the story of his daughter's life as Sarah had imagined it. Not Emma as she had been, but Emma as she might have become, the person she was becoming even in death through the love others carried. That morning, Sarah arrived at his house with a new drawing, the first one from the 2nd year. "I thought you might want this one to be special," she said, handing it to him carefully. The drawing showed Emma and David together, standing side by side, their hands linked. Around them, other figures emerged from mist and light, all the forgotten dead, all the ones no one visited anymore, all the ones whose names had been carved into stone and then abandoned. But Emma and David stood in the center, and their faces held peace. The title, They are never forgotten. The project has reached 47 volunteers, Sarah said as they looked at the drawing together. We've decorated over 300 graves, and I received a letter this week from the cemetery director. He wants to make it permanent, an official program where people can request memorial artwork for loved ones. Marcus, we've done it. We've created something that will last beyond us. Marcus pulled Sarah into an embrace, and she rested her head against his chest. They stood there together, two people who had been fractured by loss and made whole through the simple act of showing up for each other's pain. I never thought I would feel grateful for grief, Marcus said softly. But meeting you, creating this project, it's given my loss meaning. That's what love does, Sarah replied. It finds meaning even in the most terrible emptiness. It says, you mattered, and I will not forget. Chapter 9. The Stone. 2 years after that first Saturday morning, Marcus sat alone at Emma's grave for the first time in nearly a year. Sarah was at a doctor's appointment, and he had wanted this moment, alone with his daughter, to reflect on the journey that had brought him from despair to purpose. The grave was surrounded by fresh flowers, as it always was now. But there was something new at the base of the stone, a bronze plaque that read, "The Emma Mitchell Memorial Project, honoring the forgotten, celebrating the loved, refusing to let memory die." And beneath it, all the names, thousands now, from the website where people could post the names of loved ones they wanted remembered, where Sarah and Marcus and their growing community of volunteers created art for graves that received no other visitors. Emma's grave was no longer a place of solitary sorrow. It had become a pilgrimage site for people who understood that remembering was an act of defiance. That love was the only thing that transcended death. Marcus placed his hand on the stone, and he felt, not the cold he had once known, but warmth. Sarah's warmth. Emma's warmth. The warmth of all the people who had learned to transform their grief into compassion, their loss into legacy. "We did it, sweetheart," he whispered. "Your story didn't end. It just changed form. It became a story about how one act of kindness can ripple across the world and teach people that they will never be forgotten." The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the cemetery. In the fading light, Marcus could see other people moving between the stones, some placing flowers, some sitting in quiet reflection, some simply standing witness to the names etched into marble and granite and stone. This was what Sarah had imagined. This was what their shared grief had created. Not an escape from pain, but a transformation of it, from something that isolated into something that connected, from something that silenced into something that sang. Marcus walked slowly back toward his truck, and he did not feel alone. He carried with him not just his daughter's memory, but the memory of everyone whose grave received an anonymous drawing, a painted flower, a note that said, "You were loved. You will not be forgotten." In a cemetery designed for death, they had created a garden of remembrance. Epilogue. In the margin between grief and grace, two strangers discovered that love is the only language that speaks across the threshold of death.